Okay, so working towards test on Tuesday next week, finishing up. Thank you, by the way. A couple of people emailed me about going to see my dad, and I appreciated that. Got to see Dad's grave. I hadn't been there in a while. While I was there, went down to the Gulf Coast with my son and saw where my Uncle George was buried. In case you're wondering, the G in my name stands for George, but no one ever called me that but my Uncle George. So, by the way, this is my dad's jacket, and he was a pilot on the Mississippi River. This is, by the way, it's what's known as a Harris tweed. And so this was the height of civility for my dad. This was kind of the way he knew it. So a Harris tweed, by the way, is numbered so that every bolt of cloth on a Harris tweed is registered, so you know exactly when it's made. It's kind of a symbol for quality. When Dad bought this jacket, he bought it in 1982, so it's 40 years old. The jacket he bought for $250. The jacket is now worth $1,500. They appreciate in value. So Harris tweeds, you can find these on racks that you would be surprised. Just look inside, and if it says a Harris tweed, it's amazing how many are out there still. So just a thought, just in case you ever want to get into tweed jackets. Okay, so the last chapter is to talk about generic items in the future, emerging structures and strategies, and kind of give us an idea of the future of where channels are going in a very, very generalized fashion. And so if we're looking at the trends that are influencing marketing channels now, we're talking about three very basic but very dramatic changes in the way that channels are working. And it's actually kind of logical as we move towards a commoditization where everything tends to be more homogeneric, where the goods that we make tends to be the same. We're always looking for ways of making ourselves unique and different. And so we're going to talk about the first trend, and we'll finish the last two on Thursday. And those will be on the globalization of markets and e-commerce. And we'll talk about the multi-channel and the omni-channel environment to those. Those are actually extras to that particular chapter that deserve their own mention. So, the first thing to talk about is the shift in services. So one of the great difficulties, as I've said before, is the need to come up with a strategy that leads to, what's the word I want to say? The promise of the continuation of business. And so one of the difficulties, especially when you focused on products, is that products tend to be inconsistent in their purchase, especially when they're capital purchases. Corporations naturally are reluctant to sink large amounts of money into buying substantial pieces of equipment, and I'm going to use that old favorite word of mine, reefers again, all right? So the example that the book gives, and it's a great example, and I've talked about this one over again, is Emerson Electric. So Emerson Electric sells reefers, large refrigeration units, commercial in nature. They can be for trucks, they can be for ships at sea, they can be for large retail establishments. They sell refrigeration products. But the difficulty with that is, once again, the bouncing and the inconsistency of sales. So what Emerson did was they did something that was smart. They offered to buy back all of the equipment that they had sold to their customers, lease the equipment back, and not only provide a warranty contract, but increase the maintenance on it and also the calibration services. Now, one of the things with commercial equipment is when it comes to reefers and refrigeration equipment, is that they're calibrated within a few degrees of each other. A 5-degree swing in one way or another could spell disaster for several reasons. One of the most obvious is that when it falls out of code, what can happen is you can have to throw away everything that's in a refrigerated unit. And so that can be a disaster. However, the difficulty with the calibration services is it's time consuming and expensive. Rarely do retail establishments want to spend that. However, when you put it part of a service contract where the equipment is leased, it makes to your advantage to have the equipment calibrated as much as you possibly can. Leasing also takes it from your balance sheet, puts it instead of a cost of goods sold and a capital equipment, and it turns it into an expense, a different place on the balance sheet, makes it much easier to amortize the costs over a long period. What it did for them is it increased the sales and the profits that Emerson earned. It flattened out the curve in terms of the yearly amount of money that they spend, and they deal directly now with the end users, which are the groceries and the food stores. And basically what it did was it became a win-win situation. They got out of selling goods to their consumers, and it came to offering services. And so services are the key and the push that we find going through the channel system right now. One of the things that they're attempting to find an answer for is the concept of disintermediation. We were introduced this in chapter 1, and the concept is still with us, and this is the definition of disintermediation. It is the cutting out of channel partners to sell directly to end users. This, of course, is very common in e-commerce, where a manufacturer will sell directly to the end user. It will reduce sales to the intermediary sales channel, but you also find that in the shifting of services, that can actually happen farther down in the chain. And so manufacturers who are selling goods, and their major point is to sell as much as they can, pass their goods on to a downstream partner, a wholesaler, or a retailer. And those individuals are the ones that can shift services. They gain the advantage of delivery and also the advantage of support. The upstream partners are just as happy because the farther downstream partners are happy as well. And so disintermediation is a reality, but this is a way of kind of handling that difficulty. The shift to services means that there's an increase of interaction between channel partners. The interaction also leads to increased sales, and there's a win-win situation all around. So, one of the things to realize is that in selling a service, practically everybody does it, including McDonald's. And what organizations hope to do is to shift from the products they sell to the service that they offer, because they create uniqueness, and that uniqueness is difficult to reproduce. How many in here have someone who cuts their hair and you only go to that one person? Yeah, of course, we all do. All right. That one person who knows you. That is the quintessential idea of what service is. It's someone who knows intimately the things that you most desire and deliver those goods. And so, what are the characteristics of service, and how do they lend themselves towards the channel system? So we're going to go through these one at a time. This is kind of that welcoming paragraph that we always have, but we're going to go through them one at a time, starting with intangibility. A service cannot be touched or seen as in the same way with a product. A good, because of its intangibility, it cannot be inventoried, can't be physically displayed. Now, I kind of go against this identity that services cannot be patented. While that might be true, they can be trademarked. And so there used to be a gentleman by the name of J. Sebring. And J. Sebring in the 60s and 70s came up with what was known as the Sebring cut, the feathered look for men. And so part of that is that each hair on a man's head would always be the same length, whether it was short or long. He's the one that came up with the idea. But the fact is that you can't inventory it, you can't physically display it. It has a strong influence on the channels. In order to deliver a service and be satisfied, it naturally requires a stronger relationship. Because it can't be inventoried and it can't be displayed, there's naturally a higher risk of failure. And because of its intangibility, it is consumed at the moment of purchase. And so satisfaction generally, or dissatisfaction, is immediate. And so that is one of the things about an intangible. It's also one of the things that, especially with channels, defines it, the intangibility. The next is the concept of heterogeneity. Has anybody ever heard the concept of what's called Six Sigma? Heard it? Do you know what it means? Or what? What? Pardon?
I'm in the class.
Yeah, okay. Have they defined what Six Sigma means?
Like
where it came from?
Yeah.
So this is what it means. Just where they came up with the idea of where the saying comes from. So we have a collection of data, and the data is normally distributed, which means that the data falls within a mean, a certain number of responses that consumers have, all right? So one of the ways that you measure whether you're away from the norm is what's known as a standard deviation, all right? And so this is the symbol of standard deviation. In one standard deviation, this is where 68% of all of the goods lie. And so that's one standard deviation. Two standard deviations, hope I'm not going to lie, is something to the effect of 91 or 92, I can't remember. Anyway, let's just say for the sake. Three standard deviations, which are way, way, way out on the tail, is 99.3%, which means that 3 failures out of 1 million is what is expected. These little symbols are called sigmas. So when they talk about 6 sigma, what they talk about is the probability of failure, 6 sigma, all right? It means that when goods are manufactured, there is a high degree of control in the factory, and that the impact of any single employee is minimized to the point of distraction, for the lack of a better word. 6 Sigma means that it is an iterative process of constant and continual improvement to remove the differences in every piece of manufactured good. And so that is what 6 Sigma means. And that is also what homogeneity means. It's all the same. Product performance is minimized. In other words, the human interaction is kept as far low as it possibly can. Services flip the model. Instead of being homogenetic, they are heterogenetic. They are highly dependent on one particular individual delivering a service. And because the power of a single individual is emphasized in the service, it makes it harder to standardize. And it also marks the services as being unique and special. In order to be able to achieve that, it also requires a more closely direct connection to the end users, which does reduce the level of channel intensity, but it also increased the satisfaction by the customer. Heterogeneity signifies uniqueness. And when it is unique, it is difficult to be able to reproduce. And if it can't be reproduced, the consumer will go again and again to the one individual group that can create that. And so that is one of the other characteristics of service. The next is the concept of co-production. In 2015 and 2016 with Dr. Albinson, I wrote a paper on the concept of intersubjectivity in healthcare professionals and physical trainers. So, intersubjectivity as a philosophical or a psychological concept means that there is a third other in every conversation that can view a conversation as a third party. We looked upon this especially in the concept of how do we get services to provide the answers that we wish. So if I were to say fit, what is being fit? Perhaps every one of us would have a unique idea of what that meant. In the last 100 years, the concept of fit has meant many things. One of them is corpulence, fat, all right? At the turn of the last century, a fat baby was considered extremely healthy, especially because we're talking about a time of starvation. But in my lifetime, I've seen I've seen fit mean corpulence. It has meant thinness. It has meant muscularness. It has meant tone. It has meant many different things. What physical trainers do and what co-production does is it works with the user to create their definition of what fitness is. And this is the concept of co-production. Co-production is when the provider and the end user get together and create something unique. And so if I go to a physical trainer and say, I want to be fit, the physical trainer translates my ideas and my concepts in a series of exercises. And in the performance of those exercises and in the time, I will meet that standard of whatever fitness is. And so perishability of inventory is one thing, but co-production is higher as well. There is a whole series of research in marketing in 2004 by two individuals known as Vargo and Lush, which basically said that all marketing is co-production, that we have an active place in the creation and consumption of our goods. It means that the consumer needs to be present at the time of our production. It means that the consumer needs to be actively involved in the creation of whatever that service is. And so what it means is we need to create channels to be able to address those particular customer needs. And so especially in the omni-channel, with the ability to create unique situations for shipping and delivery. That's an example. Buy online, pick up in store. At a point where we thought that retailing was dying, retailing has had a revitalization because consumers have changed. And Jack Sheth, who's one of the great marketing gurus, says marketing is context driven. And as the context of marketing changes and the consumer attitudes change, we change with it. And so a high degree of co-production is needed in services, and the co-production creates greater value for the consumer. And so here is one of those aspects that has happened. So IBM, they use as an example, where as they ratchet up the service, it has an enormous impact on the channel strategy. So IBM is international business machine. They've been around since the turn of the last century. In IBM in 1967, Tom Watson, who was the senior vice president of IBM, they developed what was known as the System 36, the first mini computer system out there. It meant that computer systems could now be thought up to the masses, but we hadn't gotten to the PC yet. During the 70s, we saw the first PCs come with the Radio Shack Model 1, and we also saw the Apple II and the Apple III, but it was when IBM blessed the PC industry with the IBM PC that this really started taking off. Philip Don Estridge, who was one of the creators, the head of the entry system division at IBM, did some very radical things. He published the IEEE standards on hard drives and modems and allowed third parties to make pieces for IBM equipment, which meant that a greater integration of PCs happened with the IBM than in any other machine. At the time that the PC came in 1983, Apple had sold something like 600,000 Model 2s. In 2 years, IBM sold 40 million PCs. They, in essence, redefined what the system was. Now, here we are, 2001, IBM decides we're getting out of the PC industry entirely, and everybody thought they were crazy. 2007 comes along, they sell their laptop division, which is Lenovo. And if you want an IBM ThinkPad, it's Lenovo now. And IBM shifts everything into services. It is not surprising that in the last decade, IBM has been between number 1 and number 3 in selling software across the world. And it has to do with the fact that they've cut out the intermediaries and they have become to have a close relationship with their end customers. And so they don't mind giving Oracle those other kinds of systems. They prefer to be in the banks and in finances, those kind of places where they can make their greatest impact. Okay. And so this is one of those effects of services. Even manufacturers have gotten around to creating services now. So when I was at Omni Computer Store in Lafayette, we were selling IBM compatible machines, Columbia Data Products. We were selling Hewlett Packards as well. Hewlett Packard went into a dual distribution, and the end was when I went to Doctors Hospital to bid on the machines with the hospital there, and the Hewlett Packard rep was sitting right next to me bidding on the same stuff. That was the end. We decided that we still wanted to sell PCs, but we wanted to market our own brand. So we found Houston, we found a wholesaler there who would do what's called white boxes. Has everybody got an idea what a white box is? Okay, so if you wanted to make your own brand, you could go to a wholesaler or a manufacturer and they would build you a white box. It would be a generic machine. It would have only those pieces that they put in it, and they would even withhold any pieces that you didn't want. They would allow you to put in your own hard drive or your own video cards. So if you wanted to mix it up and get a game machine and put in a 3060 video card and then video one, those kind of things, you could do that, okay? They would also do the 200-hour burn-in for you so that you wouldn't have to worry about that as a retailer. And so that's what a white box is. It would actually allow you to brand your own machines. There's lots of influencers on YouTube that are doing this. Lots of great places where you can buy these machines, but that is a quintessential example of service. It isn't the machines that they're delivering, they're delivering the reliability of a burned-in unit that is going to work. And so this is how the transition from wholesaling to services happens, okay? How do you acquire this unique knowledge? It doesn't come cheap. How do you shift from an industry that is predominantly product into service? Well, the first way you do it is you develop in-house. You buy or you acquire individuals who have significant intellectual properties. You learn from their experiences and you grow from within. Once you grow from within, you start offering additional services along with the things that you do, and you also reach downstream to end users. Now, the difficulty is it pits the supplier directly against their channel partners. This is what dual distribution does. But if this is the direction you want to go, then so be it. This is, by the way, one of the, Tesla is a unique company, by the way. Tesla is the largest automobile manufacturer in the world. They're not the number one in terms of units. The number of units, number one, is Toyota. They make 16 million automobiles annually. Tesla does not make that many units, but they are the number one valued manufacturer in the world. How did they get that way? It isn't from the machines that they make. It comes from the fact that they have the best software engineers in the world at Tesla. If you're hired there, you're pretty well taken care of. You're part of the best group in the world when it comes to that. And that's one of the reasons why Tesla, especially when service is number one with electric vehicles, that's why they're at where they are. Excuse me. The next is collaboration. So you can collaborate, especially with a local firm that has their feet on the ground, for the basics to understand where that particular environment is. And that helps reduce the risk by limiting the number of investments that company will have. And hopefully transition successfully into a service industry. And so the last is, and this is a test question, this is test stuff, but the last question is, which is the easiest? And the easiest and the fastest is acquisition. You buy it. You initially operate the acquisition as a separate management team, but eventually you fold it into their organizations. Apple decided that they weren't going to spend the extensive amount of time trying to figure out how to make beats. They just decided to buy them. It's as simple as that. I've always wondered why Apple has not bought Disney. They still haven't. They could write a check. They have $70 billion in liquid assets. They could write a check for Disney and not even burp. I'm wondering why they haven't done that, but they just have their own way. Okay. And so these are how you go about acquiring service capabilities, how you go about getting the structure and ultimately the knowledge to be able to do it properly and efficiently. So don't expect your channel partners to sit on their hands and allow you to come in and take their territory. They didn't get where they were by being silly. The channel members may institute their own services as well in response to their suppliers shifting their services. When we decided to part with Hewlett Packard, we went in tandem with a corporation called Houston Instruments, who were making E-size plotters at the same time, and we transitioned the engineers over to a new product, and it worked. Because basically, it's not the plotters that are so important, it's the software. So we were running AutoCAD when AutoCAD had just come out, and it still was a splash, and you could use all the same software, the same drawings. We just use different equipment to be able to print. Now, if there is a risk in disintermediation, if they can read the writing on the wall, and they feel like the time is now to pull the plug, they have three things that they can do. One way is to just simply go limp and withdraw your effort. The other is to counter the negative effects that is there when a channel partner withdraws by shifting the focus to other products, competitive products or services. And this is where we went from we went from Hewlett Packard to Houston Instrument plotters, E-size plotters. They did the same thing. They had 40 gravity speeds on their pens. E-size plotters, by the way, are 60-inch by 48-inch plot drawings that they use for engineering, and that's what our plotters did. Now they have these massive laser plotters that do that. Before, they actually had little pens, believe it or not, that did all the drawing. And the last is that you launch your own services. And this is what we did to Hewlett Packard. We decided we just simply weren't going to be sitting on our hands. We weren't raised to be punching bags. And so we decided we would punch back. And so we came out with our own services. We branded it the Cajun PC. It was a crawfish on the label. And we went on. I haven't seen them in 40 years now. I can't believe it's been 40 years, but they're still going on. But they've shifted into government services and working with the schools and the parishes there. And so these are your responses when upstream partners are transitioning from products to services. You can find ways out of it, but the one thing you can't do is just to simply stay there and take it. That doesn't work. All right, we're going to stop there. On Thursday, we will finish up, talk about globalization and e-commerce. I will also talk about the multi-channel and omni-channel environments, and we'll talk about the test on Tuesday. See y'all later.